I want to start today with a question, we Bible quiz question. In today's reading, who leads Jesus into the wilderness? The Spirit, yeah. The 8:30 guys, they said the devil. And I'm like, you're meant to be the hardouts, but here we go. No, that's right, the Spirit. So even though it's the devil doing the testing throughout our passage, it's the Spirit that is said to have led Jesus into the wilderness. And in Matthew's Gospel, which is where our reading's from today, it uses much more timid language than Mark's Gospel. So get that cranking. There we go. Mark's Gospel says that the Spirit drives out Jesus into the wilderness. And Mark uses the same word, ekbalo, to describe the driving out of demons, the driving out of leprosy from the body, and also the driving out of moneylenders from the temple. So this is quite a forceful word. And the same supposedly gentle Spirit that descended on Jesus at his baptism as a dove and then declares, "This is my child to whom I'm well pleased," is now driving Jesus out into the desert. We often pray for the Spirit for power, for peace, for love, and for patience. And all of these are very lovely things, of course. But I've not once heard someone pray for the desert. I've not once heard someone ask the Spirit to lead them into the wilderness. I've not once heard someone pray to be more spiritually uncomfortable and tested and stretched. So what's going on here? Is this a loving thing for the Spirit to do, to lead us into places of dry spiritual barrenness, to encourage us into places of discomfort and even temptation? And I believe our passage today, Jesus is greatly expanding our understanding of how the Spirit works in our lives. We're very familiar with the way the Spirit comforts us in our lives, but what we must consider also is that the Spirit also challenges us. What we must consider is that maybe the role of the Spirit isn't just to soothe us in times of discomfort, but actually might sometimes lead us, or more scarily drive us, into places of discomfort, into places where we will be stretched and challenged and grow in our longing for God's work in our lives. I mentored a boy called Ryan, who's about 10 years old, for about a year before the funding for my program ran out at the Salvation Army. And Ryan was a deeply troubled and neglected child. Despite being 10, he had developmental delay and would sometimes soil himself at school, which caused all sorts of social issues for him. One day I noticed he wasn't connecting with me as he normally did, and I found out his mother had either been selling or taking his ADHD medication. Another time I had a meeting with the police where it turns out Ryan had hidden in the warehouse here at Eastgate Mall until after it closed. And then he had a huge party for one, playing with the toys and gorging himself on snacks in the middle of the night, which is obviously sad, but also when the police were telling me this, I was kind of like, it was a little bit funny. One day I saw Ryan, and I wasn't working with him anymore, but I bumped into him at his new school. And he ran up to me with a disarmingly chirpy look on his face, and he said, "Did you hear about my mum?" And I said, "No, tell me." And he said plainly, "Oh, she died in a house fire." And he was so blasé about it, I wasn't sure whether to believe him, and he had kind of a history of telling lies, which didn't help. But on the way home, I drove past his house, which I'd visited a number of times, and saw the burnt-out remains of his home. And so I looked it up online, and it was, in fact, true. Quite fairly, I think I came home feeling pretty dark. Zara came home too after working her shift in residential youth mental health. And I was never really sure how she would come home as well. It was either a joyful Zara who had connected with and made progress with severely broken young people, or it was a version of Zara like I was that day, empty and dejected. And we had a moment where we both realized we weren't in a great place. We started trying to watch the Breaking Bad series, which was very popular at the time. And if you don't know, it's a show centered around a high school science teacher who was dying of cancer, cooking meth with a former student in order to provide for his family once he's gone, which probably should have been a sign that this probably wasn't going to be the right vibe for us. But we got to a particular scene in the second episode, I think, where they dissolve a body in acid in the bathtub, but the human soup begins to leak out the bottom of the bath and throughout the house. And at this point, Sarah and I look at each other knowingly, knowing we are not in the headspace to be watching this show. So instead, we decided to watch something much more low stakes, the reality show Dance Moms, a reality show which mostly consists of angry American mums screaming at each other when their daughters don't get a solo in the regional dance competition. And I have to confess, we watched a shameful amount of seasons of the show. But this was a time in my life I would probably describe as a desert time or a wilderness time spiritually, a season of discomfort and spiritual dryness. It wasn't just the crazy circumstances of our jobs, but the dryness of my experience of God, or lack thereof. The tough realities of the world seemed distant to the theological doctrines I'd learnt about in my theology degree. And the church seemed like a place that was disconnected from the experiences I was having in the world. And even though it was my first year of being in church ministry as a youth pastor, looking back, I was spiritually struggling, but yet I was wanting to seem confident and composed. I longed for a God who felt so obviously present in places where it felt so unlikely that he was. Often in this time, God felt absent to me. It felt like God had abandoned me and had left me to do his work. Yet somehow I'm here, not only in a church, but the vicar of one. And I'm actually deeply grateful for this challenging time in my life for a number of reasons. It's a time where I began to grow in my understanding of being with those on the fringes and finding Christ in them. It's a time where my faith began to be less dependent on my circumstances or emotions. It's a time where I learnt to seek and see God differently in this world. It's a time where I learnt that I had a deep longing for God, even in God's perceived absence. I am very grateful for this profoundly uncomfortable, challenging period in my life, and I believe God led me into this time so that I might grow. In reflecting on our passage today, theologian Jack Levison puts it this way: the Holy Spirit sends us to places and people we would never otherwise choose to go, because there, where our very existence is at risk, can we understand on the deepest human level that we too are God's beloved, a source of God's pleasure. Now, we need to be very careful not to say that every spiritual wilderness, every wilderness we encounter is of God's leading, and I want to be really clear on that. Not every instance of a challenge or suffering or discomfort is part of some divine pedagogy where we grow and mature. But is it possible that the Spirit might sometimes lead us into the desert, to guide us into challenging times and places in order that we might grow? I believe so. Because I believe the Spirit is both a comfort and a challenge in our lives. And sometimes God challenges us by leading us into the desert, as we hear it did with Jesus today. The New Zealand spiritual director, John Franklin, speaks about the grace of the desert, which I think is a lovely way to phrase it. He says, the desert is a place of grace and transformation that has a blessedness and beauty of its own. While we may be stripped of pleasant feelings and all feelings of satisfaction, God has not deserted us. We learn to trust him rather than our feelings about him. We cannot feel God anyway. That would destroy us. At best, we feel our own selves as we respond to the evidences of his presence. But our feelings and the faithful presence of God are not, in the end, equitable. We need to learn that. This is a really important point for our spiritual journeys, because so often we can jump from not feeling God to concluding he has either left or was actually never really there. But the question Franklin is raising is, what if our feeling of God's absence wasn't a sign of God's abandonment or on God giving up on us or of God never being there, but instead was God taking us deeper into a journey of spiritual transformation and love? What if these seemingly spiritual dry times are actually opportunities in our walk with Christ? What if it's a season of maturity, obedience, trust, and growth? And what if God will meet us in profoundly new ways if we see out the season we are in? Our text reminds us of this slightly uncomfortable truth that the Spirit's job isn't just to soothe us, it's to lovingly challenge us and grow us towards Christ. In 1991, a group of scientists got together on an ambitious experiment. They wanted to create an indoor, artificial, materially closed ecological system that mimicked the Earth's environment and hoped that NASA could use something similar in space. So they built an $150 million 3-acre mini-world in which 8 scientists lived in for 2 years. And they called it Biosphere 2, which is pretty cool. There hadn't been a Biosphere 1 project. They just considered Biosphere 1 to be the biosphere of the world we already live in. But multiple things went wrong in this experiment. Ants somehow got in and ate the plants. The concrete was leaking carbon, so oxygen levels were too low, and then the 8 scientists had to split into 2 groups of 4. But one thing in particular was very strange. The trees were falling over. Some of the world's leading scientists had tried to create the ideal ecological environment, but the trees were falling over. And what they found was that the trees actually needed the stress, the resistance and pressure of the wind outside. Because when a tree experiences resistance, its root systems grow deep and the tree grows stronger. And because it's stronger, it can incline itself towards the life source of the sun. The growth and strength of a tree is dependent on the exposure to the pressures and resistance of the external world. But because they had sheltered the trees, they didn't have enough strength to stand on their own. And I think this particular story speaks to the grace of the desert as well. That if we are sheltered too much, if our lives are defined by comfort and the pursuit of it, if we live towards the avoidance of hard things and hard places, we will not be strongly rooted in this world and experience the depth that it has to offer. That actually the challenges that this world presents aren't always a threat to our faith, but may actually hold the key to unlocking a more meaningful one. There is a wisdom found in the desert that is not found elsewhere. And so my prayer for you as you go this morning is that you'll go ready to meet God in unexpected places, discovering in the desert a grace that transforms and matures and reminds you that you are deeply God's beloved. May you go this morning trusting that when the Spirit leads you into the wilderness, it is not to abandon you, but to deepen your roots and draw you closer to Christ. And may you go this morning unafraid of discomfort, believing that even in seasons of dryness and doubt, God very well may be shaping you into a stronger person. Amen.